Actually, I'm pretty sure it was Sandra in 1985 or so that I did an LRT, and she said this book, this Course in Miracles, most important book in 2,000 years. And I kind of perked up and I went out. Actually, it might have been even my ex-wife who bought the books, and I started studying them. And I just really took to it, you know. I liked how it was laid out. It's in 3 volumes, although now you can get the course all in one book, you know, 1 volume, but it's still 3. It's a text, a workbook, and a teacher's manual. And the text is more of the theory and the philosophy behind it. And the workbook is a series of daily lessons you do for 1 year. There are 365 lessons. So you do 1 a day for a year. So it's a spiritual practice, you know, it's something you commit to and you do it, and you read the lesson.
Tell them to start with the lessons.
Actually, you know, the text is very deep and the language is often complex sentences, and the meaning is very lofty. So sometimes people find the text, they're not ready for it right in the beginning. So if you start from the text, it can almost put you off of the course because it's the language is so way out there. So I always suggest people start with the lessons because they're very practical. You know, the language is simpler. The directions are clear. It'll give you a thought of the day to remember. And then it'll tell you how to remember it and how to apply it. And then it'll give you some explanation of that thought, what it's trying to do. I like to say now that the lessons in the Course in Miracles are mantras. You know, they're very lofty, high thoughts that can take us up into a higher frequency in our mind, in ourselves. And that's exactly what a mantra is. It's words that have a very high frequency that can undo our thought that's lower thought and take us to higher thought. And then when we're in that higher thought, our problems are solved. You don't have a problem. The higher you go, the fewer problems you have. The more clarity you have, the more you're living from your own certainty. You know, and this is the purpose of the Course, to take us into higher realms of our own mind so that we can have certainty, we can have more peace, we can have more joy. We know we're created by love, and love is what we are. So that's the purpose of it. It's interesting that Kim said he woke up kind of not thinking, or not all in this chatter that normally he's in, which is a very good sign. And I think because for these days, all these days, we've been clearing, undoing, letting go, breathing out. So what happens naturally is that our mind becomes more still. Our mind becomes more vast, open, empty, which is a wonderful place to be. And this is also what the Course in Miracles is trying to do for us. Sandra's always asking me, well, can you recite some of the lessons and talk about the lessons? And, you know, when I talk on the Course, I don't have a note, I don't have a plan. I just start talking about it and I know what to say next, right? So I don't always, sometimes I'll talk about a lesson if it's relevant, but I don't systematically talk about the lessons. But I will, because I think they're pertinent to us as rebirthers, as breath workers, and what we're trying to do with our clients and what the Course in Miracles is trying to do with our mind. It's the same thing. What the Course is trying to do, and it says, you have a mind that you made up. You put all this stuff in it, right? You made a self from that mind. Like Marcus. Marcus was born in Ohio, in a family, had a sister, middle class, simple parents. You know, all that stuff that comes in our history, it's like what we've made of ourselves, right? Liked art, went to art school. You know, all of our experience, we make up a self. Everybody does. Everybody makes up a self. Nothing wrong with that. However, the Course also said you have a God-created self that you didn't make up. So you have this self you made up. Let's just call that my personality, my tendencies, my traits, my everything, my body, my, you know, things that I did in the world. That's the self we made up. That's also the self that has conflict, pain, suffering, duality, call it what you will, experiences that are traumatic that we remember. That self we made up holds all that. Now, this self that God created knows about that self you made up, but it's not affected by trauma, conflict. It's in a state of absolute connection with its source. It's spiritual. It's a spirit. It identifies with spirit, not the body, not the personality. I mean, and then, you know, that was a good question, Andrea, the Holy Spirit, what is it? Well, this self God created has this connection to the source and also has this connection to the self you made up. And that would be the Holy Spirit that's the mediator between the two. So the purpose of the miracle is to heal us. Because in this self we made up, we've got a lot of fear, guilt, anger, things going on in our body, pain, suffering, sorrow of some kind, questions, uncertainty. It's just everybody has that. You have to be honest, you know. We all have that. It's not always fun being Marcus Ray in a self I made up. But now Jesus comes along and he says, yes, you made that self up, but God's will for you is to have perfect happiness all the time. God's will for you is to be in the heaven state all the time, not to have all this hell that you made up. Only the self we made up makes a hell. But when you get higher in your evolution, your spiritual awakening, let's say, your ascension, there aren't any problems. There aren't any reasons to be sad. There aren't any reasons to be angry, fearful. But that's according to how much you wake up. I had this teacher, Tara Singh, and he studied many years with Krishnamurti, Krishnamurti was a very giant of a figure in the 20th century. He was groomed by the Theosophical Society, and then he became a world teacher. He was really the first world teacher that traveled all over the world because the airplane and transportation made it possible to do that, quite easily. So Krishnamurti said to Tara Singh once, "There are no problems in life, none. In life, capital life, like you could say God. There are no problems in the mind of God." He didn't use that language. He would just say life, but it's the same thing. Let's just say your real mind, your mind connected to its source. He would say, there are no problems in that mind other than the ones you make up. Well, that's the ego's mind making up the problems, right? Making up the self down that has the problems. Yeah, so hold your questions till the end. So we made up a self, it has problems, but then we have this other self that Krishnamurti said has no problems. Well, that would be Christ consciousness. That, Krishnamurti didn't use that language, but he was talking about the same thing the Course is talking about. Is like leaving behind the self we made up, ascending, forgiving, and that's the way you do it. You have to see the mistakes you made and let them go, and not with guilt, but with joy. Oh, I didn't even realize I was making that error in my mind. And I didn't even realize I was causing my own suffering with that error. Like, let's just take the personal life, for instance. I'm not worthy, I'm guilty, I'm not wanted. We're all in touch with the negative thought that's affected our life, right? Well, okay, so how do we step out of it? We have to forgive ourselves for having the thought in the first place, and then we have to think a different thought. And that process is healing. That's the process of healing. It's healing the mind. And that's also the miracle. When you give up a thought, I'm not wanted, and you say, well, I made that thought up and I was victimizing myself with that thought. I was creating all kinds of experiences in my life to prove I'm not wanted, right? But it was a thought. And now I see, oh, I am responsible for making all those experiences with that thought. And then I'm willing to let it go. And then gradually, your life starts to change and you don't attract those experiences where you feel unwanted. In fact, the people you attract then, you have something to give, they have something to give. There's a synergy and you have these joyous relationships. So you've healed your mind, and that's miraculous. Miracles are happening in the mind. And then the action of the correction is the main purpose of the Holy Spirit, Andrea. The Holy Spirit's purpose are only two. Either it's correcting your wrong thinking, or it's expressing joy and gratitude for your joy of living, celebration. It's either correction or celebration. That's the real religion, and you look at the history of a lot of religions, especially in the East, when they really got the community together and they were really in their divine vibration, they created a culture of celebration. They have all these ceremonies to the divine, all in the temples. There are these statues of people dancing and connecting with God. And that's the other function of the Holy Spirit, is to connect us in joy so that we can celebrate, or help us to see our errors and help us correct them. Those are the only two functions of the Holy Spirit. So the lessons in the course start like this. They're in groupings, right? There's 365 lessons, but they're in these groupings. There's like parts, and there's reviews. So there's groupings of lessons, and then another grouping, then another grouping, then another grouping. And then there's actually a part 1 to the course workbook and a part 2 to the course workbook. So the first grouping is lesson 1 through 50. They're like a grouping and a very integral curriculum. It's very integral, like 1 through 50. It's like it's the most important. It's accumulative. Like if you don't get 1 through 50, 60 through 80 won't mean much to you. It's based on you getting those first 50 lessons. Then, okay, you move on, you do the next 20, and they make more sense because of the first 50 got you clear, right? So the first 50 get you a certain level of clarity and prepares you for the next 20, and those 20 prepare you for the next 20, and those prepare you for the next 20. So like that. So each lesson builds and allows you to go a little step higher because now you have these under your belt, right? And now when you read the next section, it makes sense. So you have to do them in order. You can't jump around, and you can take more than one day to do one lesson. So that means it'll take you more than a year to go through the workbook, but don't ever do 2 in a day. Only one. Only work on one lesson a day. So what do these first 50 lessons, what's the purpose of them? The purpose of the first 50 lessons is to show you that you have this self you made up, and that you also have this self that is connected to God and is God created. That's the purpose of the first 50 lessons, to get you really clear on that. I made up a self, and how did I make it up? And what are the issues with that self? And then there's this other self. We may not even believe it exists, right? If I told you you have a God-created self and you've never had any contact with it, you might just say, oh, he's just kind of a fanatic idiot talking about religion. And he probably doesn't, who knows if there's another self. I've never seen it, so maybe it doesn't exist and he's just going on, So it's easy to dismiss this God-created self because we've had so little contact with it. It's not in our experience. So it's easy to say, well, maybe Jesus says it's there, but this Jesus, who cares, So that's the dilemma, is our unwillingness to even see that there's this other dimension. It's the dimension of the absolute. We have a mind, and mostly we live in thought, and thought is relative, and thought is dualistic. It has opposites. Oh, I like these people. I don't like these other people. I like this quality about myself, but I don't really like this other quality. So you see, it's two. It's always two. It's always this or that, this or that, this or that. And then we get into living, and living is just a series of assessments of this or that. It's judgment. I have to judge this, that. I have to prefer this. not that. You know, it's always this or that, this or that, this or that. And many times we pick the wrong thing and then we're dissatisfied, or we have a conflict or whatever. So our choices don't always bring us what we want, even though we think at the time, I'm going to choose that and it's what I want. But then we get it and then all hell breaks loose. So you see, that thought system is dualistic. Now, this thought system that is God created has transcended all that and doesn't have opposites. You would say at this lower level, well, there's life and then there's death. Opposites. But at the higher level of your true self, it says death is an illusion, there's only life. And you're never born and you never die. You're just immortal. So see the difference? It's absolute. It doesn't have opposites. It just is. It's the truth, and the truth is unaffected by the false. The truth is unaffected by what's not true. And I often use this example. I think it's a good demonstration. You know, for many centuries, people in Europe thought the earth was flat, right? And they only would sail out their ships so far. And then they had these maps which showed the edge of the earth. You can't go too far because the ship will fall over the edge into the abyss, right? So mankind believed that for a long time, centuries. And then finally, you know, some guys looked in telescopes and saw other planets and saw that they were round and thought, well, maybe the earth is round and maybe the earth isn't the center of the universe. The sun is, and the earth's are round and they're going around this sun, and that would explain why there's day and night. So they started thinking differently, right? Well, all the time they thought the earth was flat and they thought that was true, it was really false. The earth really was round, that was true. But all the time they thought the earth was flat, the flat earth never existed. It was an illusion. It never was there. So when you get to the level of truth, there aren't opposites. There's just what's true. What's true is real and it's there, but what's false, it's not real. It's non-existent. You see what I mean? So at the level of the ego, we think both are true. We think, oh, well, you know, I'm not good enough. Oh, and I'm good enough as God loves me. So we think both those things are true. And then we have experience to prove I'm not good enough. And we may even keep attracting it. And that's kind of our litmus test. If we've really transcended duality into this absolute state, are we still attracting the negative things in our life? When you stop attracting them, then it's because you're seeing they're not, that thought I'm not wanted or I'm not good enough is not true. And you stop thinking that thought and you start getting other experiences that aren't in conflict. But you're letting go of your lower mind that's relative, that has opposites, that's dualistic. You're letting go of that. And you're rising into this higher mind that doesn't have opposites, is closer to its divine source, has a stronger connection, and all the problems are solved. The problems don't exist at that level. So this work we do, we call it ascension. You're ascending out of the lower levels of thought, of your mind, of your ego, into these, you're using forgiveness as the means to look and let go, look and let go, breathe it out, look and let go, breathe it out, look and let go, breathe it out. Each time you rebirth yourself or somebody rebirths you or you give a rebirthing session, you're going up this ladder of holiness where you're waking up more. So you're not deceived by the things that aren't true anymore. It's not true. And there's nobody on the planet who's quote unquote not good enough, no matter how many mistakes they've made, right? We're all God's creatures and we all have divine intelligence and we all can make contact with that divine intelligence. And that's just a fact. So, all right. So these first 50 lessons I was mentioning, it's interesting how they start, because Kim said he woke up and he kind of didn't have any thoughts, he had this kind of emptiness, this kind of blankness. Well, the first lesson is my thoughts nothing I see means anything. Nothing I see means anything. And then it says, well, I've given everything I see all the meaning it has for me. I've assigned meaning, just like, I've assigned the earth is flat to the earth. Doesn't mean it's true, but I've assigned it and I think it's true. You see? So the first miracle is to seeing what I think is true. My thoughts do not mean anything. What I see does not mean anything because I'm using a thought system that may or may not be true. It's dualistic. It's not reliable. It's telling me mixed messages all the time. I like it, I don't like it, this, that. So there's no certainty at that level. None. And that's why Jesus starts out with the first lesson, nothing I see means anything. Because he's trying to get you in touch with this filtering system you use called the ego that's never certain, that's inherently judging all the time, measuring, assessing, picking, rejecting, and no peace in that thought system. And that thought system doesn't mean anything. So he starts there. Okay, then he goes a little farther with you. He says, well, I noticed you're upset a lot. Okay, yeah, that's true. I get upset a lot about a lot of stuff. Who could say they don't have that going on? And then he says, well, you're never upset for the reason you think. You're never upset for the reason you think. And you don't even understand what you're seeing. Yeah, I think lesson 3 is I don't understand anything I see. So my understanding is unreliable, right? And then I get in life, I go along and I bump into something or someone does something and I get upset. And then he says, well, you're not even upset for the reason you think you're upset. And then he says, well, you're upset because you're looking at something that's not even there. And all you see is the past. You base your life on the past. That's what the thought system of the ego does. It has memory. Things happen. We record it. Then we base our judgments on what we experienced. And then we live our life based on those experiences and this assessment of our experiences, which is all in the past. And then when we have an upset, it's just something that's triggered from the past that's not even there, but that's why we're really upset. Let's say some painful thing happens with you and a person, and then you don't want to see him again. Well, all right, you think it's out of your life, but then some other thing happens that's the same combination as this thing that hurt you from the past, right? So you didn't forgive it back then, and now it comes back around, new people, new situations, but it's the same upset. And you think it's those people now, but it's really the upset that you've been carrying around from the past, could be even a past life. I'm never upset for the reason I think. It's always something from the past. And my mind is preoccupied with the past all the time. Now, we need to memorize some stuff, right? We need to know where our house is. We need to know how to drive the car. We need to know where the grocery store is. So sometimes the past is useful. We need to know those things. So I'm not making it wrong. You can't just throw the whole thing out, but you have to see the limitations of it. And when it comes to emotional states, it's very slippery ground when you're using the past. And you're probably emotionally reacting to things based on past experiences, not even what's happening now, but this accumulation of past resentment, past hurts, past whatevers that were painful. And then this experience brings all that to the forefront. And we think we're upset about this first thing, but it's really all that other stuff behind us that's upsetting us. And then it goes so far as to say, you've never really been in the now. You've never really been in present time. From the day you were born, you were reacting to life from your past memory. You weren't even really present with life. And why? Because you're using thought, and the nature of thought is in the past. That's the nature of thought. What is thought? It's like, okay, I think something that I thought before, and I memorized it, and it went in my memory, and then I can access it. And that's thought. Knowledge, which we all think is so great, and it is to a certain degree, you know, all the technology, all the things we've learned, building bridges, building airplanes, that's accumulation of knowledge, but it's all past. It's all the past with some discoveries along the way that are new, and then that evolves the thought, but mostly it's a storage of the past is knowledge. And knowledge doesn't necessarily bring you joy, happiness, peace, a sense of well-being, a sense of love. You can have 3 PhDs and be miserable. So it's not knowledge that's going to make you happy. Might make you a better professor or a better doctor or a better engineer or whatever, but it may not bring you peace and joy. So what would bring us peace and joy? And then we have to see, well, the nature of the absolute, which would be peace and joy, it doesn't live in thought. It doesn't live in that level. So we have to rise above thought to make those contacts. My meaningless thoughts are showing me a meaningless world, it says. And then it says, I'm upset because I'm in this meaningless world that's unpredictable. And then it says, a meaningless world engenders fear. I got fear. What disaster is going to happen next in my life based on my past? Right? So thought, that's the best thought can do. It can help you avoid the disaster and try to seek the pleasures. That's the best thought can give you. And thought, you know, it's nothing wrong with the pleasures. I mean, sometimes they're very delicious, but, you know, once you have the pleasures, then you're back in the same boat you were in before, looking over your shoulder, hoping no catastrophe is going to happen to you next. So that's the nature of thought. It's never certain, all right? And it engenders fear. And then it says, God did not create a meaningless world. God did not create a meaningless world. It's lesson 14. See, I'm taking you through the 50 lessons. I'm doing what Sandra Ray always asks me to do, talk about the lessons. So I'm going to take you through the first 50 lessons, and we'll see where we are when we get to the end. It says, God did not create a meaningless world, so it doesn't exist. But you've made up all these images, it says next. My thought are images. My thoughts are images I have made up. I've made up all these images of things, people. Oh, yeah, that Michelle, she's kind of a mystic, but she's a little bit retarded. I like her, but, she's a mystic, so you can't... She's going to be out there sometimes when you need her to be here. All these thoughts. Or Simon, he's really straight. He really wants to go deeper and be a better rebirther, and he's so serious. I can form all these kinds of thoughts and opinions about people, and we do all the time. It's like almost involuntary. Those are images I have made. Images. My thoughts are images I have made. Then it says, well, you're never neutral on those things. You always have a judgment. What's that mean? If it says, I've made the images, and then it says, I have no neutral thoughts. No neutral thoughts. Well, what's that mean? No neutral thoughts. They're charged. They're negative, positive, they're charged, right? I like it, I don't like it. They're not neutral. Well, peace is neutral. Joy is neutral. Love is neutral. These absolute states are neutral. They don't have a charge, right? But my thoughts are never neutral. And what I see, because I'm seeing through my thought, that's the other lesson the first 50 are trying to get you. You think you see stuff and that it's true or false, but you're only seeing stuff that you've made true or false. Your thought has made what you see. You think it, then you see it. See, the ego, it tries to trick you and say, well, it's the other way around. No, you have this neutral stuff and you see it, and then you think about it and make these judgments. It's the other way around. You make the judgments and then you see what you judged accordingly. So that's how tricky this is. We make up a world based on what we think the world ought to be. I mean, we think a world ought to have war in it, obviously, and weapons of mass destruction that we spend trillions of dollars on. We made that world up. We thought it was a dangerous place and we need to defend ourselves and we better make these weapons. That's all preceded by fear, thought, ego, all that. We made up the world according to our thinking, according to our thoughts. And then that world we made up, it says, the world I see is a vengeful world. Vengeful. That word, vengeful. Somebody does something to you, and then you get back at them, and then this conflict of vengeance perpetuates. Oh, they need to be punished. They need to be paid for their misdeeds, and that's vengeful. And that's the way we've set the world up. Crime and punishment. Guilt and punishment. Guilt always demands punishment. It's vengeful. All right, then it says, I can see this whole world differently. And I have to be determined to see it differently, because how I see the world is what world I get, right? I am in charge of what world I am in. I am in charge of what world I see. And I have to be determined to see it differently. How can you escape from this world you see, which is vengeful and in conflict and has pain and suffering? How can you escape from it? It's a question we all have, you know. It's a basic question of life. How can we escape from our suffering? First thing Jesus says is, give up your attack thoughts. Give up your judgments. I can escape from the world I see by giving up my attack thoughts. It's lesson 23. I can escape from the world I see by giving up my attack thoughts. Meaning, give up anger, guys. You can't have an attack thought without being angry. That's what anger is. It's an attack thought. Well, give up your anger and start there to see a different world. So if we all made a commitment this instant, for my own enlightenment, I'm going to give up anger. That 5 days that you spent with Sandra and Marcus would be worth it. If you saw that one thing, I can ascend in my evolution, spiritual evolution, by giving up anger forever, completely. I'm not going to justify it anymore. Righteous rage is a fallacy. Rage is never righteous. It's vengeful. And vengeance keeps me from having my real mind, my peaceful mind, my God-created mind. So I am choosing not to be in heaven by keeping my anger. All right, so then it says, give up your anger, and furthermore, you don't even know what you're doing. You don't even perceive your best interests, and you don't even know what anything's for, and you're lost. And you need some guidance here, because you've made up this hell, and you don't even take responsibility that you made it up. You think life is doing something to you without seeing that you made the hell. You made the hell with your thoughts and judgments and feelings and tendencies and the self you made up. All right, so if you get to that point, that's lesson like 26, you're in a good place. You're in a good place then, because you've taken responsibility for your hell, and you've seen that you made it up, and you see that all these thoughts I have make up my hell, personal I being one of the major ones that makes up your hell. That's why we spend so much time getting to it. And I can give it up, and I can see things differently. Then it says, well, above all this crap that I'm seeing, there must be another way. Above all else, I want to see the truth. I don't want to see the false anymore. I want to see the truth above all else. I want to see the God-created world above all else. I want to see peace instead of this, right? But it has to be your energy, your desire, your need, so to speak, right? Okay, so you say, well, above all else, I want to see things differently. And then it says, God is in everything you see. And God is in everything you see because God is in your mind. God is in your mind. God is not an external thing. God's not an external force. I mean, yes, it is out there. The energy of creative spirit is out there, but it's also in here. There's no out there and in here. It's all one thing, right? God is in everything I see because God is in my mind, and I'm choosing to use that mind that is seeing through God's thoughts, not my separated ego thoughts. I'm going to choose that consciously. Above all else, I want to see. Above all else, I want to see things differently. What's differently mean? I don't want to use my ego thoughts. I want to use higher thoughts. Then it says God's in everything you see, and God's in your mind. And when you see peace and joy and beauty and love and those absolute states, what do you think you're doing? You're using God's thoughts. Joy is a God-created vibration that's a thought. And you're choosing above all else to see that. Then it says you're never a victim, even of the stuff you did in the past that you victimized yourself with. I mean, how many times did we sabotage our life with our personal lie? I'm not good enough. I can't do it. I'm not wanted. You know, all that stuff. Those are thoughts. Those are affecting your life. And we use thoughts to sabotage ourselves. And now you're not a victim of those thoughts anymore. You're going to give them up. I'm not a victim of anything I see now. And this is a very important point. We have to get out of victim consciousness. And this is a major purpose of rebirthing. Get you out of victim consciousness. Even all your traumas at your birth, you attracted those from former lifetimes. You know, former thoughts that you hadn't forgiven, and you come in and you have a vibration, a frequency, and it attracts your birth, your parents, your time in the womb, your how you come out, all that is like your thoughts manifesting, your frequency manifesting. But now you're saying, I'm not even going to be a victim of that anymore because I've invented it. I'm not a victim of the world I see. Why? Because I invented the world and I can stop inventing it like that. I could see peace instead of this. There's another way of looking at the world. I could see peace instead of this. I could see through my divine mind, not my separated ego mind. My mind is part of God's, I am very holy. Okay, that's the next lesson. My mind is part of God's. God's in my mind. God's in everything I see. Oh, what's the nature of that? Peace and joy. When you're using that mind, you can only get peace and joy, free of conflict. You can only get that because that's only what that is. God's mind has no conflict. And you're part of that mind. So are you going to use that mind to solve your problems? Or are you going to use this other brain mind that you've been using all along that's only giving you problems? Your choice. You have free will. You know, God's not going to make you wrong if you choose the ego, but you're going to be in pain if you do. So it's up to you. Do you want pain, more pain? Or do you want to transcend that level of your mind and get into this other frequency? Because you're very holy. You are holy. You are a holy son of God, not just Jesus. See, the purpose of a spiritual master is to awaken you to your own mastery. Not to make you dependent on them or subservient to them or like, oh, Jesus is up here and we're down here and we're lowly worms and oh, he's the only son of God. That's baloney. Who do you think created you? You are a son of God, just like Jesus, or a daughter of God. The only difference between Jesus and you is Jesus doesn't have all those ego thoughts that he made up. He transcended them, forgave them all, and rose above it. And we're still down here grappling in that level, right? So when we ascend up and leave that all behind, which is forgiving it, letting it go, see it, forgive it, breathe it out. See it, forgive it, breathe it out. We're doing that ascension. Well, then we go up the scale, we go up the ladder of our holiness, and we become more Christ-like. It's not a person, it's not a personality. Jesus is a man who realized the Christ state of consciousness, just like Babaji was a man who had the Christ consciousness or the Shiva consciousness. So we can too have that consciousness. We can be the Christ. It's Christ Trine, Christ Kim, Christ Monique, Christ Simone. That's what you're being when you're in a rebirthing session and you're showing up as the Christ for that person. You're not going to judge. You're not going to have attack thoughts. You're going to have forgiveness in your heart. You're going to teach them how to forgive their past. And that's very holy. And you're surrounded by holiness all the time. Holiness is always here in everything surrounding us. Are we in touch with it is the only question. Most of the time we're absent. We're not paying attention. We're not in touch with the holiness, but we're surrounded by it. It's like omnipresent. That's the meaning of that word, omnipresent, present everywhere. Holiness in this shirt, holiness in that statue, holiness in this computer, holiness in the wires and the electricity. It's all holiness, everything, holiness. Holiness in the tail of the cat that just stuck up in Michelle's screen. You know, everything is holy. And you are that. And when you're in touch with that, it says, there's nothing my holiness cannot do. My holiness is a blessing. I'm blessed by this holiness. I'm blessed by this awareness of my God consciousness. I'm blessed and I give blessing. I'm blessed, I see it, and I give blessing. So your whole purpose of life is to be blessed and give blessing. And there's so much joy in that. Wow, you get there, you don't have problems. You just have joy and you're just in a flow, right? I'm going to go I need 5 more minutes and then I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so then he says, God is here and my holiness is here, and God goes with me wherever I go. Like you go to the grocery store, God's there with you. You go to Estonia, God's there with you. You go on the plane, God's there with you. God goes with me wherever I go. Wherever I go, God is there too. There's no place in the universe where you can go and not be connected to God. And then this vision says, God is my strength. And then I have this vision of my holiness. It's beautiful. And that's my source. That's my light. That's in my mind and I'm connected to it. That's the love that I experience, and I can easily forgive because I know if there's anything that goes wrong and anything is a undesirable happening, I'm responsible for that. It's not somebody doing it to me. It's I'm attracting that with my own frequency. So then forgiveness, love and forgiveness are so close at that point, you can forgive anything. because you're forgiving yourself. There's never an other. It's always that other is acting out something in me. And when you see that, you'll never look on the world the same again. It'll always be, okay, they're just showing me what I need to forgive, and I'm going to do it instantly. And then you move on, and then you move on, and then you move on. So you always stay free of attachments, free of memories that stick to you, that are traumatic. You don't have any PTSD anymore, blah, blah, blah. You let go immediately when something traumatic happens, immediately. You forgive it immediately. All right, well, that's close to love. That's the closest we can come to love in this dimension, is when we've mastered forgiveness. And then that gives us tremendous strength. And it frees us from fear. And then the more you become a student of this work, those thoughts are in your mind all the time. They're in your mind all the time. Personally, I'm not bragging about it, but I have all 365 lessons memorized, and they're in my mind all the time, and I can call upon them anytime. I'm laying there in bed at night, I can't go to sleep. I just think of the lessons. Well, at least I'm using my time in a valuable way, right? And these lofty thoughts just take me higher and higher. So it says, God's voice speaks to me all through the day. Well, that's what the lessons are. They're designed to speak through you all through the day. That's what the practice is. Each lesson of the Course in Miracles is a practice. And they give you one thought, and they say, okay, well, think of this thought 2 minutes in the morning and 2 minutes in the evening. Or they might say, think of this thought for 15 minutes and just sit there quiet. Or they might say, remember this thought on the hour, or remember this thought on the hour and this thought on the half an hour. So they'll tell you to remember the thought during the day. And then the last lesson, number 50, one of my favorites, it says, I am sustained by the love of God. You've made that contact. You've made that holy contact with your Creator. And you have so much gratitude. And it's the love of God that sustains you. It gives you the air you breathe, gives you the water you drink, gives you the food you eat. Divine Mother gives us all that stuff. Why do you think we say praises to the Divine Mother? Because it's all of love manifested in what we need to sustain ourselves. Everything physical is the Divine Mother.
Do you want to tell them the difference between part 1 and part 2 at the end?
Yeah, okay. So I'm sustained by the love of God is number 50. And you really do start to feel that. And you trust it, and it brings you joy. And you notice you don't have so much fear anymore. And those first 50 lessons took you through that. And you see the self I made, something I have to transcend, and this self God created is accessible to me. All right, well, Sandra wanted me to mention there's part 1 and part 2 of the workbook. The workbook part 1 is mostly about forgiveness and undoing your ego. That's the first 200 lessons. And then part 2, from 221 to the end, it's all beautiful poetry, beautiful lessons that are very short. They're only a half page long, introducing you to your Christ self. So they're all Christ consciousness in part 2. Part 1, you got the battle going, my ego self versus my higher self. We need forgiveness to get through that. We need the Christ energy to get through that. So it's kind of working out your ego in part 1, but now you've worked enough out of it. Part 2 is only Christ consciousness.
But you really need to do all of part 1 so you can integrate part 2.
Yeah,
you shouldn't jump ahead.
You can't
skip ahead.
You won't even get it in part 2 if you don't do part 1. that's my synopsis of the first 50 lessons of the course. And did that suit your liking? I talked about the lessons.
We could do more, but he had a question.
Yes. Anybody
I
questions?
think Kim had a question earlier, or did it get answered, Kim?
I think he was just.
Did you have a question, or did you want to?
I just want to. I thumb up for what you said. I just felt it so authentic and true. That was my.
Thank you. Okay, I should go on the physical.
Okay. So now we're going. Yes, Andrea, quickly.
You said it's best to study with somebody else. Did you say you were doing talks on the Course in Miracles?
We have a we call it the Gifts of God program, and you can join it anytime. Although the people that are in it now started with me in January, and we meet once a week on Sunday at 1:00. And Sandra and I do a daily podcast on something from the Course in Miracles, and we send that out to everyone, on a daily basis. So you get the email with the daily podcast, and you get the link to join every Sunday at 1:00. I give a little talk, and plus we connect with each other, like here. How you doing? What's going on? So we keep our group kind of going,
But we have recordings of all the lessons that we've talked about every day. Right
now,
So when you do each lesson, you can listen to what we said last year about that lesson.
Yeah, we have podcasts on every lesson in the Course in Miracles on our podcast station.
Okay.
You have to do a little scrolling, but 300 scrolling down, you gotta, but you can find them. Yeah.
Great.
Okay. So we need to move. Are you ready? I'm complete.
Yeah, go. I'm done.
Okay.
Hallelujah, brother.